Welcome to all our listeners. I want to introduce you to Ubuntunomics. It's a fresh new podcast that gives you the most important and relevant political and economic developments from Africa. The podcast is hosted by myself, Sia Beniza, the Executive Director at PESA. PESA is an independent think tank that promotes regional integration in SADC and also provides research on the political economy of development in Africa. With me is Sbu Nyati from Isakombe Assets. Isakombe Assets is a community development enterprise that provides communities and individuals with renewable energy assets in order to develop our communities. Welcome, Sbu, and I'd like to hand over to you to take us through the discussion on the South African news for this week.
Hello, Sia, and hello, everyone. Our top stories for the week from South Africa are, the first one is the energy cost increases that we've had. Eskom announced that it will increase electricity tariffs by 15.6% starting on the 1st of April in 2021 this year. This follows the Power Utility and the National Energy Regulator of South Africa reaching an agreement on Eskom's allowable revenue for the year 2021-2022. The High Court in 2020 found that the Power Utility should recover 69 billion rand in a phased manner over a 3-year period.
So hold on, Sbu. What do you mean by allowable revenue for the financial year 2021-2022? What does this mean?
This basically means that according to NERSA's model, taking into consideration all of Eskom's costs, including their expenditure costs, they work out a recoverable, and this 69 billion rands is the recoverable for the year, and this for the 3 years, I mean. So this is what NERSA and Eskom have reached. This is the decision.
Okay, so we're saying that, in the regulation of energy prices, Eskom has an allowance to make recoveries on is it on losses, or what are they recovering?
It is not only on losses. It's basically on all of Eskom's costs. That means
I see. So the pricing includes a cost recovery element.
Precisely.
Okay. No, that's clear to me. So this is the context of a utility, a monopoly in the utility generation in South Africa. All right, now that's much clearer. Over to you again, Sbu.
Precisely. This company is struggling to service. They've got a 464 billion rand debt, and this has subjected the country to intermittent power outages since 2005, because Eskom has old power plants, and it has failed to maintain these plants, and this has stifled economic growth and investment both in the industrial and the mining sector. So a big portion of this debt is due to capital expenditure projects, mainly the Medupi and the Kusile coal-generated power plants. The initial expected cost for the build program for both power plants was 80 billion rand. That was way back in 2007. This was later revised to 154 billion by 2013. But by 2019, the cost of Medupi independently was estimated at 234 billion rand.
That is one of a staggering increase. That's almost 4 times the initial projected cost.
Exactly. This is one of the. Now, when one factors in loan repayments, interest, and all of that, the total debt for Eskom reaches 464 billion, and it is expected to go up to about 500 billion by the end of the year.
Wow. So just a mistake, I want to correct myself there. 3 times the actual projected 80 billion, which is coming at 234 billion in 2019. Wow. It'll be interesting to see where those figures lie now, given that a lot of the construction is still taking place and there have been disruptions such as the COVID-19 pandemic, which is probably has affected issues. But that's a story for another day.
Precisely. Getting back to this tariff price increase, NERSA had negotiated with Eskom and reached a settlement, initially a settlement of 10 billion, to mitigate the risk of going to court, because the Eskom was asking for 23 billion rands. So Eskom is entitled to this 23 billion rands, but they have reached an agreement of only 10. So if we had gone with the 23 billion rand addition, we would have had an increase of 21%, and at the current agreed amount, that will only result in only 15.6%. These price hikes will filter through to the end user in different municipalities as those municipalities pronounce on their tariff hikes. And what will happen is that these tariff hikes will include the municipality's own markup. So it might happen that these tariff hikes, by the time the end user pays, would be around that 21%. So only time will tell. We will see when the year end, the municipality's year end kicks in. Our second story will be fuel price increases. Coming on the back of this 15.6% electricity tariff increase is the fuel price increase, which took effect on Wednesday, the 7th of April. The price of petrol increased by 1 rand per litre inland and 99 cents per litre at the coast. The South African Parliament stepped in to voice their concerns. Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Mineral Resources and Energy, Mr. Sahlulele Luzipo, said that the fuel price would undoubtedly have a negative socio-economic impact on the livelihoods of many South Africans. The chairperson wants a briefing from the department on the basic fuel price and how the increase could be mitigated. He is quoted as having said, "Let's look at the pricing and taxing in relation to fuel. Whether our local domestic tax mechanisms are they necessarily assisting where they are located."
What does it mean by this? Okay, so firstly, my question to you, Sbu, is what is the reason for this increase? Usually, the increase is either that the oil prices have increased, international oil prices have been very stable. I think they're stuck between $60 and $65 a barrel at the moment. Yeah. And if the South African rand depreciates, obviously this pushes up the local price of fuel, given that we're importers. So in this instance, the rand has been quite stable. In fact, has been appreciating since the beginning of the year. So what would be the reason for this increase?
The Department of Mineral Resources and Energy are the ones that set the pricing. But in this case, it is the competency which lies at National Treasury to do the budgeting. So this was basically through budget allocations. A large portion of the South African petrol price is made up of levies, with a general fuel levy and the road accident fund levy taking up the biggest chunks. Increases to these taxes were announced by the Finance Minister Tito Mboweni in the February budget speech, with the levies charged on every litre of petrol sold. So with the effect from Wednesday, the 7th of April, the fuel levy in the price structure of petrol and diesel will therefore amount to R3.93 per litre and R3.79 per litre, respectively. The road accident fund levy in the price structure of both petrol and diesel will amount to R2.07 per litre on the day.
I see. So basically what we're seeing now is the reflection of an increase in the fuel levy as well as the road accident fund levy. Okay, no, I understand.
Very precisely. These energy increases will in all likelihood have a negative impact on all sectors of the economy, including mining, transport, sellers of fast-moving consumer goods, and on households. Yeah, that's the end of our second story. On the third story in South Africa is about the ANC-NEC, which decided on the step-aside rule. The long-awaited step-aside rule regime was finalized by the African National Congress a fortnight ago. The NEC, which stands for the National Executive Council, decided on the implementation of the NASREC 2007 conference resolution, which will have serious ramifications for the party's leadership at all levels, including in the various provinces. At the last meeting, it was decided that even the highest ranking leader, which is the party's Secretary General, Mr. Ace Magashule, be given a 30 days to step aside from all official party duties. The SG will now consult past senior leaders as he prepares to step aside, or if he fails to step aside, he will be suspended by the party. The Eastern Cape was the first province to put the resolution to practice when former MEC Miss Gomba was instructed by the PEC to vacate her office. This followed her appearance at the East London court on charges of corruption. Mr. Magashule's predicament has been likened to that of former President Jacob Zuma. Even though circumstances and the political climate are not quite the same, the radical economic transformation faction inside the ANC, which is aligned to the current Secretary General, has also been given an ultimatum to stop using the resources of the ruling party. The question most onlookers are asking is whether the Secretary General has enough backers to mount a comeback from his looming suspension, and exactly how the ruling party will implement this resolution as the party embarks on a program of cleansing its image. Yes, yeah. That was my third story for the week.
It's interesting to see where this step aside is going to end up. There's a lot of people speculating as to whether or not the Secretary General is going to step down, given that it's such a high level and public post that he's in, but also in the provinces who seemingly are behind the step aside rule, they're going on in terms of implementation. So it'll be interesting to see where also this consultation leads SG in terms of his final decision, don't you think?
Precisely, and many are saying as long as both factions, which is the Cyril Ramaphosa-led faction, the CR17 faction, and the RET faction, as long as both both members of these factions are treated the same, everything will be fine. But as far as many see it, Secretary Ace Magashule's faction is being purged, as some see it. But it is a developing story. We will see as things go. Yeah.
Sure. Anything else from South Africa this week?
The last topical story. In fact, it was just a data release by Stats SA this afternoon at 1 p.m. Stats SA released the latest manufacturing production data for February 2021 at 1 p.m. As I said, manufacturing production decreased by negative 2.1% year on year in February. This as opposed to January's negative 4.2% year on year. This equates to a negative 1.2% month-on-month decrease in manufacturing production over the month. January had 0.0 month-on-month decrease. The data reflects the constraints in transporting and movement of people and goods, and a slowing economic recovery from COVID-19 caused by the second wave, which hit South Africa in the first quarter of 2021. The biggest decrease in production was recorded in petrochemicals. It was negative 0.84% year on year. Metals and engineering recorded negative 4.8% year on year, and furniture came in at a negative 17% year on year. Nevertheless, the motor vehicles and transport equipment were positive at 13.2% year on year. The subsector recorded strong growth for the fourth consecutive month since October 2020. Since the automotive sector is largely export-oriented, the data also suggests a faster economic recovery in the rest of the world compared to South Africa. Yeah, those are my four main stories.
This last point quite depressing, really, on manufacturing. And given the fuel and energy price increases you highlighted earlier, it makes one wonder as to what the rest of the quarter is going to be like. And obviously, as this kicks in on the 1st of April, this will definitely have a dampening effect on the second quarter as well. Interesting. And I think the mixture of all of this, slowing growth as well as possible price increases. I mean, we can expect inflationary increases due to the energy as well as the fuel increases that are in effect as of 1st of April. So this is really going to make a difficult macroeconomic environment for the Reserve Bank when it has to make its rating decisions soon.
Yes, but all in all, National Treasury had an optimistic forecast for the year. They had the country's GDP growing at about 3.3%. So it will be interesting to see where these positives will be coming in from, as the consumer is still very depressed.
Yeah, under significant pressure. Okay, I think on that note, let me take us through the rest of Africa developments this week. First of all, Ubuntunomics shares its condolences with all Tanzanians and the family of His Excellency Dr. John Pombe Magufuli, the 5th President of the United Republic of Tanzania, who died on the 17th of March this year. Former President Magafuli died while undergoing treatment at the Mzina Hospital in Dar es Salaam, and he's been replaced by Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, who is a member of the ruling Social Democratic Chama Cha Mapinduzi, sorry for butchering the party's name, CCM party, which was sworn as the first female president of Tanzania. and assumed office on the 19th of March. And you might have seen with the most recent SADC meeting that she's already has a full agenda on her table, also given that conflict issues in Mozambique are spilling over into Tanzania.
Yeah. Now, Sia, tell me, who is this Hassan? I mean, what's her style of leadership? How has she handled the COVID-19 pandemic? I mean, we had a Magafuli who was, what's the comparison between the two?
Sure. Well, you'll remember that former President Magafuli was seen as a strong man in terms of his character and his style of leadership. And I think also driven by his strong stance against illicit financial flows and, the mega shutdown he did multiple times of not just the forex traders, but also large industries in Tanzania, which has pitted him against the interests of multinational corporations and global finance. But this lady, Her Excellency Hassan, has been the vice president since 2015, and she's also served as a Minister of State for the Union of Affairs in the Vice President's office prior to this, and has been a Member of Parliament since 2010. And her previous portfolio has been the portfolio of tourism, trade and investment, as well as the labor, gender, development and children portfolio. She's obviously been in the ranks as a member of the ruling party, but also has quite a lot of experience, at least from the aspect of economic development in Tanzania, but also gender and labor challenges. So I think from a leadership style, she's slightly different. She's a mother of four, in her 60s, and one would expect her leadership style to be slightly different than that of former President Magafuli. There's obviously a lot of speculation on the part of private sector that she'll be more amenable in terms of negotiations, at least for foreign direct investments, to which former President Magufuli was known for having a very strong stance and having a very hands-on approach in terms of the treatment of cross-border capital flows in Tanzania. But understandably so, given the history of illicit financial flows, which have extracted upwards or a peak of around 51% of GDP, as a World Bank study once found over the decade 2010 up until 2020. So that's really her background and where she comes from. But I think she's very well experienced, also having been there as a vice president since 2015, is someone who is very capable to take over the reins from former President Magufuli. And obviously, this is a big win for gender equity as well, as the first female president in Tanzania, but obviously still a long way to go in that country and the society there.
Sounds like the best candidate for first female president, yes. Yeah.
Definitely. So former President Magufuli will be fondly remembered for his legacy of constructing the standard gauge railway linking the Dar es Salaam port to the Morogoro, Dodoma, Isaka Mwanza line, and Isaka Rusumo Kigali line into Rwanda, and the Tabora Uvinzi Musungata Gitega line into Burundi. And this really connecting Tanzania into the rest of the East African economy, which on the continent is still the fastest and top growing region across the board.
Yes, both Rwanda and Burundi, yes, I see.
Yeah. Again, Ubuntunomics shares its condolences with all the Nigeriens and the families of those who have died in the post-election violence in recent terrorism attacks in the country, Niger. Niger held its first round of presidential elections in December 2020, and since none of the 41 presidential candidates received a majority, a second round of elections was held in February. And the incumbent President Bazoum won the second round of elections with 55.7% of the votes against former President Mahamani Usmani, who lost, ending his term, ending his reign after 2 terms. A number of institutions and governments have condemned the violence and terrorist attacks that has left over 317 fatalities during March alone.
But who is responsible for the terrorism? Is it the jihadists or is it the nationalists? Any linkages to ISIL, perhaps?
It seems as though it's a mixture of terrorist groups, both from neighboring countries in the region, who are also affected by the insurgence and the spread of Islamic fundamentalism as a result of the conflict in North Nigeria. So this has spread and affected Niger, which is a direct neighbor of Nigeria in the north, and also spread into neighboring Mali. And so the conflict at this point, in terms of the post-election conflict, is a mixture of the Islamic fundamentalist terrorism, as well as mobilizing some of the discontent domestically due to challenges faced in the country in the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the country has been having a difficult time recovering, and this has put a lot of pressure in terms of social stability in the country.
Jihadist or any linkages to ISIL? Yeah.
It's not clear at this point. I think it'll be interesting for us to see once, because he's expected to be sworn in later this month. And perhaps we could pick up on that in terms of the further details as to the real causes of the violence and who's behind it once we've seen him being sworn in successfully.
I see. ECOWAS is active in that whole West African region. What have they said so far? Have they instituted any military responses?
No, so ECOWAS has been quite quiet at this moment, except for obviously national governments condemning the violence. But as a region, they haven't really stepped up. It seems as though there is this, I mean, it's common in regions really that there would be an unequal response to some of the regional conflicts.
Yes.
For example, if you think back to, I think it was 2015 when Yahya Jammeh refused to relinquish power after losing the election, it wasn't even within a week that the ECOMOG, the standing force of the ECOWAS region, was deployed, and that whole scandal ended in a matter of days. However, standing conflicts that are now spreading into the region, affecting neighboring countries such as the Boko Haram issue, haven't but even warranted any deployment of a military response from the regional standing force. Obviously, Nigeria being a big economy and a country in the region is also one of the biggest contributors to that regional force. And so it seems as though, although the countries might be good in dispensing the medication and remedy, it's quite difficult to take the same medication for themselves. We have seen this in SADC as well.
Yes.
This unequal response due to regional challenges. Okay, whilst we're still in West Africa, the next story is from the Banque Centrale des États d'Afrique de l'Ouest, which is the West African Central Bank, which is planning to structure and issue obligations de relance, which are recovery bonds or securities to finance recovery plans and economic recovery in the region. This follows the COVID-19 coupons or treasury bonds, which were issued at the beginning of the pandemic in April 2020. And the interest rate of the recovery bonds will be market dependent, but the central bank hopes that national treasuries and investors will agree on rates that are informed by the current decline in global financial market rates. Obviously, with the slow recovery from the global pandemic and the search for yield, with advanced economies having low and even negative interest rates, this has put less pressure on emerging and developing countries in terms of the cost of funding for them, given that investors are struggling to find good returns elsewhere, and so their risk appetite and the cost of political instability has slightly been depressed as a result of the lower global financial market rates generally.
Those COVID-19 coupons you talked about way back in April 2020, how was the uptake on that? Was there any appetite?
There seems to have been very strong appetite. And this has been different, obviously, across the different countries in the region. Cote d'Ivoire, the frontier countries that are part of the West African Monetary Union have been the biggest beneficiaries. Benin successfully issued a COVID bond as well, and Senegal. However, some of the more internal or landlocked West African Monetary Union member countries who are partly also suffering from internal conflict and security challenges have had a mixed result in terms of the appetite.
I see.
Yeah. Our next story takes us across the continent to East Africa, as this week marks the 10-year anniversary of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia's construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, commonly referred to as the GERD. The GERD was originally planned to be completed in a period of 5 years, but it's taken 10 years to witness the first filling of the dam. Initially, the project was estimated at 78.3 billion birr, which is the Ethiopian currency, but so far construction has cost close to 112 billion and is estimated to cost a total of 160 upon completion.
Yeah.
So again, the implementation of infrastructure escalating in terms of the cost and the budget, and also the time delivery. I mean, just on the time alone, we've doubled the length in terms of the delivery.
Reminds
this
me
is
of my
largely due to. Sorry,
it reminds me of. I was saying it reminds me of my earlier story about Eskom, whose budget also doubled, and the time frame also.
Almost 3 times what they were initially projected, now that they're coming close to the end. However, this has been largely due to Ethiopia's tensions with neighboring countries, Sudan and Egypt, over the filling of the dam. The dam is situated at the foot of the Guba mountain, which is 20 kilometers from the border with Sudan. And the GERD is currently the biggest dam in Africa and 7th biggest in the world, with the potential to generate 6.5 gigawatts of hydroelectric power. The government of Ethiopia plans to continue construction of the GERD, which has now reached almost 79% of its entire construction, despite the deadlock in negotiations with neighboring countries who are seeking to block the filling of the dam. Ethiopia had originally planned to fill the dam in July 2020 to begin generating electricity and enable upstream development in the country, whilst Egypt demanded a different pace and that Ethiopia should postpone filling the reservoir until an agreement was reached by all three. Meanwhile, Sudan has rejected the Ethiopian proposal due to long-term technical, legal, and environmental concerns. The African Union intervention has failed in this regard in terms of brokering a solution, and recent talks hosted by the Democratic Republic of Congo ended this week with little progress and without resolving the deadlock in negotiations. This is something that's definitely going to affect the recovery in East Africa, and Ethiopia, which has already been facing challenges domestically due to conflict in the Tigray region, now has to face further challenges with the implementation of this GERD filling as it comes close to completion on the construction side.
Who's been financing this GERD dam? I know here in South Africa we had to go out and borrow, get funders, foreign funders. Who has China been involved in any way? Do you know, Sia?
So as a result of the conflict, actually, if Egypt ended up blocking Ethiopia's attempts to solicit funding from international markets. Eventually, Ethiopia decided to build the dam with its own resources, and has had a massive public mobilization drive to raise funds at a national level. I remember a couple of times where there were calls not only to Ethiopians domestically, but the diaspora in the rest of the world to return remittances back home and also contribute and make their due contribution to the building of this dam. So it is really a matter of national pride, despite the challenges that the government has gone through in order to finance this. And obviously, one of the bigger challenges across the continent being energy supply. This will unlock a major binding constraint on the Ethiopian economy and allow it to develop some of its upstream industries and improve its industrial capacity as a country.
Yes, I interrupted you. You were talking about the war in Tigray, and now I'm just trying to think what would be the effect if as you say, Ethiopia has had to finance this from their fiscus. So take that and mix that with the war up in Tigray. How will they come out? How do you see them coming out as we go forward? Will there be a cessation of the hostilities in Tigray, or do you think the war in Tigray will have any bearing on the completion of this dam?
Sure.
On finances, I mean, yeah.
Sure. Look, I think the dam is at advanced stages of construction at the moment. Firstly, the government has declared that the conflict in the Tigray region has stabilized, and in fact, Eritrean forces are expected to evacuate the region. Okay. And on that front, the Tigray conflict, although at this point is being assessed from a humanitarian and a human impact perspective by the international community, the conflict itself has largely been stabilized and has largely been under government control, or there's some level of a ceasefire. The issue of the dam, though, is still going to be a major diplomatic challenge for the country, and unless they can find some amicable agreement amongst the three countries, the filling of the dam, which I think the Ethiopian government will proceed with, is going to raise political tensions amongst the three countries, to say the least. It is a region that has been heated in terms of conflict, but this has historically been domestic conflict or even historical tensions between Ethiopia and Eritrea, which current President Abiy has come in and resolved when he started his term. But now there seems to be this regional conflict, and obviously the region itself is still in the process of dealing with a high level of refugees coming from the Middle East conflicts, particularly Yemen, which was affecting Ethiopia and neighboring countries in the Horn of Africa. It'll be interesting to see how this sort of regional conflict or tensions now play themselves out on the back of what has already been a heated region, when I say in terms of, as I say, in terms of conflict.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, the last story is on Mozambique. Mozambique's development of the liquefied natural gas facilities in the northern part of Cabo Delgado has come under increasing threat from the growing violent attacks by militant Islamist insurgent groups Ansawar al-Sunnah wa Jama and Al-Shabaab. Following the increase in number and geographic spread of the attacks in the Cabo Delgado during December, the Mozambique LNG project has gradually increased its security level from vigilance level 2 to security emergency level 4. In addition, the project personnel in Afungi were downsized from 5,000 to 1,200 by January 2021. The current operations are limited to maintenance and some critical works, focusing on completion of planned additional security measures. And the most recent attacks in Parma on 24th March seem to have really shook the country, but also the region in terms of the response to this violence, and has caught the attention of the African Union and SADC member states, as well as neighboring South Africa, and also resulted in total evacuating all of its staff from the project. A current review of the Joint Task Force was conducted in order to make necessary adjustments and improve security weaknesses. Some of the adjustments include replacing surveillance posts with bastions, increasing the Joint Task Force troops to 850. At the moment, the task force troops are 1,045. And the current agreement between Total and the government is that Total pays the government for security through the Joint Task Force. And to encourage the energy company, the government is expected to augment the Joint Task Force with private security personnel. Today, SADC has convened an extraordinary double Troika summit in Maputo to deliberate on measures to address the terrorism in Mozambique. And what they've resolved is to deploy a technical deployment, which is largely a tactical review team, who will go to Cabo Delgado and make an assessment of the conflict and the necessary response and report back by the 28th of April. And at that point, we then expect SADC countries and other development partners to start making commitments to what Mozambique will make as a request in support of the conflict in Cabo Delgado.
You carry on. Does Total evacuating all its stuff from the project mean that they are pulling out? What does that
mean? No, so they haven't instituted a force majeure clause as yet. Force majeure meaning that, for reasons beyond their control, the project is being stopped, and that hasn't been the case, which is a very strong commitment by Total that they will continue the project. However, I think it was more of a safety and a reputational issue that has pressured them, particularly after the attacks on the 24th of March, to pull out all of their staff from the region, whilst the regional governments put together a response. Because for the longest time, Mozambique has tried various means to deal with the conflict, but has not been succeeding. They have involved Russian private security and South African private security, and that hasn't been sufficient. And the violence in Cabo Delgado seems to be escalating. However, the only kind of adequate response would come from the region, given the limitations. I mean, as you can already see, we've got 1,000 Joint Task Force members, which is less than the staff contingent on the actual project. So there's a serious concern in terms of a risk from a security point of view that the government itself cannot deal with alone. Obviously, there is also a historical element and regional historical context, which also makes it difficult for Mozambique to accept involvement of neighboring countries or foreign government on its soil in order to respond to the conflict. And so this is made for quite a difficult context. Yeah, the involvement of the apartheid government in funding Renamo in the Civil War period post-1975, post-independence, is one of the critical reasons why at this point Mozambique has got distrust for South Africa, including Zimbabwe and Zambia, who are also involved in supporting Renamo for their own selfish reasons during the Civil War period. The Cabo Delgado conflict has also taken a regional dimension now following the attacks in Tanzania in October last year, and this should also expedite the process of SADC to provide a regional response to the Mozambican conflict, especially given that the government of Mozambique is the current chair of SADC. During the 40th summit, the heads of state and government in August 2020 received an assessment report on emerging security threats similar to what they receive today, but have been slow in terms of their acting and in terms of responding. SADC further then asked Mozambique to provide a roadmap on the type of assistance it needs and would deliberate upon before course of action was chosen. And so this is precisely why they've approved a technical deployment in order to make the necessary assessment and respond to the conflict. So although SADC lacks a regional standby force, the regional plan for responding to regional terrorism will allow those countries with adequate military capacity to provide support in areas where the conflict is beyond the control of the national military.
Are there any fears that this conflict might spill over into South Africa? Because South Africa shares a border with Mozambique in the same way that Mozambique shares a border with Tanzania. Are there any fears that the conflict might spill over?
I don't think at this point. I think given that we're talking over a 3,000 kilometer distance, I mean, on opposite ends of the country, that the conflict is going to have a direct impact. It might, as a result of refugees fleeing Cabo Delgado and perhaps some of the terrorists disguising themselves as refugees flowing into South Africa, which is a major concern, not just for South Africa, but all the neighboring countries. So there is that concern. And this is why the SADC leaders have responded quite swiftly relatively swiftly following the August 24th or the March 24th attacks.
We had our earlier story, your earlier story about conflict out in West Africa. They have ECOWAS. SADC does not have a standing force. Do you think it is time that SADC got into negotiations about having an ECOWAS type standing force for the region?
Sure. I mean, this has been something that's been touted in SADC for a while, but obviously due to a lack of necessity in terms of a risk from a conflict, excuse me, most of the SADC conflict with the last country that came out was Mozambique in Angola in 2001, and Mozambique in the mid-90s. So this has always just been an idea. But I think even beyond that, the response shouldn't just be militarily. It should also include a humanitarian response, which I think, given the impact of what we've seen with the cyclones and the devastation they've left, SADC and being caught unawares and not ready, despite having all these policies in terms of response to natural disasters, as well as this organ on peace and security. None of these policies which are in place are actually being operationalized. So what we need to do is operationalize and move from the point of discussions and long talks. However, the other challenge is that the region itself is going through a difficult economic time at the moment. South Africa constituting close to half of the regional GDP and being a country that's been in a constant economic recession and slow growth for the last 10, 15 years, has also had a negative impact on the resources that are available for countries to deploy towards regional efforts. And so all countries seem to be focused on their own domestic challenges. This is true of Zambia, this is true of Zimbabwe, who have historically been amongst the top 3 or top countries that would have contributed in terms of a regional standby force. Are countries that are currently facing difficult economic times and with governments that are facing severe it's an economic crisis in Zimbabwe and it's a fiscal crisis in Zambia. So at the moment, there are just no resources to be applied to these areas, despite the need.
Interesting.
I think that brings an end to our first episode and really brings an exciting time.
Yeah.
I think to all our listeners, thank you for your time and thank you for joining us. We'll be with you next week.